All right, so hello again. I think from my side, as I wrote in the email last, Linq is sort of covered. So what I wanted to do this time around is sort of see those two exercises that I sent out, which were pretty good exercises. If you guys got a chance to take a crack at it. Um, if yes, we can go over those scripts, or alternatively, we can just sort of do an open Q&A kind of session saying, hey, we went through this many items so far, and you must have some question as to, hey, why is this thing this way? How do I do this, or how do I do that? So I was thinking we'll sort of go into that. So who did the exercises from the last week? Awesome, Ari, great. Did you do both of them or one of them?
I did both of them. I guess I just had some questions on the first one, which was about the batching.
Yeah.
So conceptually, like I understand the exercise, right, of what needs to be done. I know how to do it in Python, right? But really, I guess what's a little tricky is when I got to the part of actually doing the batching, right? So I guess you'll probably have like, say, maybe 2 levels of generators, right? I think that's kind of how I saw it. It was unclear how to like condense down the syntax, because it seemed like basically you have to write a lot of code to do the second level of batching. Like I think you have to do enumerable and then the iterator as well classes, like both classes. But I was more interested in like how to condense that down. But I guess kind of the second exercise shows that, because you kind of have 2 methods which just return enumerables on the spot kind of thing. So maybe that kind of answers the question there for what I was looking for. But
so, is there any way for you to share me through some web link as to
it's on GitHub. It's on GitHub.
Okay.
It's forked from your repository.
Can you send me the link? In something, I'll have a look.
Yeah, 1 second. And I don't mind if you want to share it on the screen. I don't know, actually, if you have access to your GitHub, right? If you just share the repository, right, and you just click on the fork number, right, I can just tell you which one it is if you're sharing the screen.
Okay, gotcha, perfect. We can do that. We can do that. So GitHub.
And then on I think there's a forks number upper right, all the way at the right, at the up.
Yep.
Yeah, and then I think it's the first one right there, Avinash shows up.
Yep.
And so then there's an assignments folder. And then I think
nice.
Whichever last one, just 2 hours and 1 hour ago, I guess 213 is probably it.
This is the select method.
I think 213 probably is it. Yeah, so I wasn't sure how to condense down the syntax, right? Oh, maybe I didn't push these changes. Oh, shoot. Let me see. Sorry, I do have the changes here. Let me commit it in. Sorry.
Oh, Pawan is here. Hey, Paus.
Hey, bud. Sorry.
Okay, I think it should be there. I just pushed it.
So it was 213, right? Okay.
Yeah. So I kind of cheated and used like this temporary list to kind of make an iterator out of it, because like syntactically, I wasn't sure how many classes I would need to implement, right, in order to do this. But kind of the my batch was what I summarized it down to at that point.
Okay, let's look at that in Linkpad, and we can talk about it. Okay, perfect.
So I think maybe that's actually not being used. That method is probably not being used.
This is not really working, right?
Yeah, that one I think is not being used. It's just the top block probably at this point, yeah.
Right. Okay. So you said input INumerable. You're gonna add it to the list, and when you get it, you return it, and then you create a new list. And
Then whatever last elements are left, right? If it's not a complete batch, to return those then.
right, right. So I do this 95 to 10. So let me try out a few things. Batch index equal to 0. So, Pawan, we are sort of going over the exercise from the last week and sort of just going to do a high-level Q&A. If there are any questions around Linq that I didn't go through, and then we'll just sort of call it a closure. That's the idea here. So let's run this guy. Right, so batch 0. I have to increase the index plus. Let's take up to 30. So let's see if I do 31 and I do a batch of 10. There should be 4 batches. Right, so I'll start with 1. So batch 1, batch 2, batch 3, batch 4. All right, that looks correct. And yes, this is fine. Okay, this is completely fine because you have to sort of get a container to contain the elements that you're going to accrue up to the batch size, right? So you use the list as a container. A fun exercise would be to use array as a container, right? That would be a fun exercise. So this is something, in case you're curious, try to do it. But otherwise, conceptually, this is right, that you are able to create a batch function which takes an INumerable of an unknown size and returns you n number of INumerables based on the batch size, right? So you can sort of think like this is a very useful concept because a lot of times you have a list and you want to do it in batches, right? That, hey, let me do batch at a time so that is, or maybe it's like you have, say, 100,000 elements, right? And let's say you want to do parallel processing on them, right? And you're like, okay, let me create some batch sizes and I'll assign a worker thread to process each of the batch, right? So is everyone clear as to what Avinash wrote? Yes, no, someone, something?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
It looks pretty straightforward, right? And so here's the main idea, right, that I try to kind of highlight on in terms of, how you do system design is the base class library that comes with .NET Framework has a lot of useful concepts. But you have to remember that Microsoft will not write this sort of additional methods, additional constructs, which you might run into, right? Especially in our line of work, because it's not general enough, right? When they put something in the base class library, they want to make sure that all the developers, no matter what kind of work they're doing, they can make use of those functions, right? So it's not that they can't implement the batch method on their own. It's pretty simple for them to do. The reason they don't do it is because, hey, what is the applicability of this particular feature we're going to add? Because there are mainly two constraints as it comes to, Microsoft putting in more features in a language or in a library. One is it costs time and money, right? So is it worth the time and money that you're going to spend, right? And two, once they put something out, they have to maintain it till the eternity, right? So this is not like the world of some other languages where they will deliver something this month or this year and next year is deprecated and all that. Microsoft does not have that philosophy, right? They're very, one of their cultural values backwards compatibility, right? So if that is your value, then you want to be very mindful of what you add to the core library, core language, and that's why they're conservative, right? But at the same time, they have designed everything where you can build something on top and make it part of your toolbox and then let you get things done better, right? So this particular exercise that I showed you, I'm going to show you where I ended up getting it from. Right? There is a project called Linq.
JD, before we
Okay.
move on to more Linq, is it a valid solution if I just do group by 1 divided by batch size? That gave me the answer, and that's.
Do you have the code sample that I can look at and talk about?
It's in my repository.
So I have to go to your fork now. Okay, 1 second.
It's like a 1-line code. I mean, it does the same thing that Avi's thing does, but I'm just doing group by 1 divided by batch size.
Well, which one is you? Shishir Gupta. All right.
That's a good, I guess, conceptually, that's a good idea too. Probably use like, I guess, an index is my guess, right, to do it.
That's a typo. We don't need that variable. We can just use 1 divided by. Because you're always doing that, right? Like, and this gives you the answer that you want.
That is an interesting approach. Let's see. I will have to think about it myself. Let's see. It's a very interesting approach. You know, I try to get you to write the code, and you always like, how can I find something else that's just the code? You writing the code. I like
no,
this
because that, I'll be honest with you, that goes from code reviews as well, right? Like when I write something which takes 10 lines of code, I start thinking if it can be done in a shorter, more concise way using functionality that's already there in the library, because that's something that you preach. So
yes. Yes.
I'm in agreement. Yes. I think that makes sense. If I was as familiar, I would have probably thought about these kind of things, but I was like, I just want to get the answer first, and then the plan was to optimize from there, but that didn't occur.
Right. That's totally fine. Actually, I'm not even sure about what group by returns, so let me look at, right? It returns a group by of int. Yeah. So the thing is, though, you know, you change the signature of the T, isn't it? Like, I'm not sure if you're returning the correct thing, right? I don't know if you can see what it is returning, but it's not returning I enumerable of T, right? It's returning an I enumerable and then I grouping of integer T. But because I grouping of integer T is again an I enumerable of T, so it works.
Exactly. Yeah, I was about to say that, yeah.
Right?
So I saw that. I didn't ignore that. I saw that, but then it was still I enumerable. So I was like, that's the solution.
But I'm sort of, I don't know, but this code doesn't seem clear to me. You say split equal to 0. And
no. That's what I'm saying. Just remove line 21 and write 1 divided by batch size.
1 divided by batch size? Source divided by batch size. Because I'm not sure how you can do 1 divided by batch size.
Source dot group by.
Is that what you're proposing?
Yeah.
How would this work? Let's see. Let's kind of
run it.
So this is another thing, right? So I really, this is interesting that you did this, right? Here, let me show you one thing, right? When I wrote all those examples, what did I do? Enumerable dot range 1 to 100.
Yeah,
and it gives you 1 to 100, right?
Agreed.
Right? And this is another thing, right? The more you start thinking about, hey, how can I get enumerables easily? there are a whole bunch of ways to get enumerables easily, right? There is no reason to do this, right? This should be like in your mind all the time that there is something called enumerable.range and associate function help you produce an enumerable, right? So let's do the enumerable.range and then do numbers, and to see your logic works correctly, we'll just do 10 and we'll do batch size of 2. Well, that's not correct. Right? At least I don't see how it's correct. So let's do more where batch batches, batch stuff done. Nope. Unless I'm missing something obvious.
I'm doing 1,000 and 100, and I'm seeing 10 sets of. I can debug this, but no.
Okay, 1,000. You said 1,000, right?
No. 1 second.
No, I think when you change that split plus plus.
Yeah, it's split plus plus. Yeah, sorry. It's split plus plus, and then you do it fine, and then it will basically. Yeah, just do split plus plus, and then just define split as 0 just above that. So basically you're starting with a split of 0, and then you're basically incrementing it and then getting those batch sizes as your split keeps increasing. Yeah, do batch size 2 now. Yeah, do batch size 2.
So that variable was important, actually.
This is so beautifully hacky and short. I love it. This guy's a smart guy. Shishir's my hero starting today.
All right, I am gonna disagree. The code that you cannot exactly tell me on the spot what it is doing, and you ask me to change it, I change it, and it doesn't work. I would disagree.
I literally completed this at 11:40, and I'm still working on the code. I did not want to commit this, but I had to because of 12 p.m. deadline. So I completely agree. If you don't want to accept it, this is not my final version. I might have changed it further as well, but I looked at the exercise this morning. I was late. My bad.
I'm with you.
I'm not trying to give you hard time to share. What I'm trying to tell you is, one, does it really capture what we are trying to do, right? Yes, it is a good idea to use higher level constructs to produce something, but it is not immediately obvious at all, like, how is this doing that, right? And two, and more importantly, you change the construct, right? You are no longer returning an I enumerable of T. You are returning I grouping of int T, right? So if I were to look at this guy, right, the batch, and if I say batch.getType, right, you see how it is I grouping of int, right? Because you are forcing that int as the first one. So this, what you're returning is this. Okay, and what I asked you to, so you're returning this guy, right? And what I asked to return is this, right? So you're not returning what was promised. Now, what is happening is this is, when you enumerate over, is actually just going to give you an I enumerable of T as well, so it doesn't matter, right? But if I was relying on something else, then I will have, if I was doing something other than iteration, then, you know, it's not honoring the contract that we agreed upon.
I agree. Right? I don't think about that.
This is quite clever, okay? It is very clever what you have done. and I'm going to obviously borrow Eric Lippert again, right? He's like, what did he say? He said something along the line of, if you're clever enough to write it, you're not clever enough to debug it. Something along that line, right? And I think what we want is non-clever code as much as possible. I'm still not able, even right now, I'm not able to wrap my head around as to what is happening. When is the plus plus happening, right? Because you see this key 0, 1, 2, 3, that is your split by, right? So I'm not able to visualize how is this group by working. Can you help me visualize this group by?
So basically you start, you take in the source, right? So let's go from line 1, line 25 source. And then you start with 0. So initially it's going to do a split of 1 by 10, which is going to give you your first set, right? And then after that, basically I thought you need to increment that. And then basically let me break it down and send something better to you. Give me like 2 minutes.
Okay.
I think the core
Let me
tenet
see
of
if I
this
can
lies
draw.
on
Let me see if I can
integer.
draw a diagram.
So while
The
Shishir
core
does
tenet
that,
of this
is someone else able to
is integer
visualize what?
division. Yeah, it's integer division. So what's happening is batch size is your denominator, and then basically the first, until you reach batch size, you're at 0. So that's your first return, and it's grouping by that index. So you're creating the index on that loop. So until you hit batch size, your index key will be 0, and that's what you return in the group by. After you've hit basically between 1 and 2, before you hit the second batch, like when you, like, let's say your batch size is 4 and you're out of, you have a whole list of 10, your fourth element would be, it'd be 4 divided by batch size, so you get 1. 5 divided by batch size is 1. 6 divided by batch size is 1. 7 divided by batch size is 1. And so you're relying on integer division basically to generate a unique key. So how many parts does it take? Those parts of each whole get grouped into one key because it's integer division.
Right. You could actually go further and probably put X at this point, since we know that it's numbers in order, and I think you would get a more logical solution. But that's again playing to it being integers.
Okay. All right. I guess I'm just not smart enough, but I really am not able to visualize. Because if you think about it, right, this whole thing, right, has to turn into that move next state machine. And I'm not able to visualize where is this variable captured that it is getting incremented properly. You see what I'm saying? That is what I'm really trying to understand, right? Think about that enumerable, right? What you return is an enumerable. Now, unless I call this iteration, it's not going to do anything. So there is a move next method. So what state machine this turned into is what I'm not able to visualize. And it's fine, maybe I don't, I can't wrap my head around it. It's fine. But when I look at this, right, it makes sense to me that I'm what my state machine is. My state machine has this one variable, which is my temporary holder. I'm going to iterate over my input enumerable, keep adding to my container till the size. And as soon as I get the size, I'll return that container and I will reset that container. Right, so that's sort of, at least intuitively, I can visualize every single thing that is going on. Right, I can't do with this one, but it's okay. It's fine. Anyway, so we will sort of continue on to that, and we'll come back whenever towards the end Shishir is ready to share with us how he came up with this idea. But what I want to talk about briefly is this thing called more Linq, right? So someone said, hey, you know what? The Linq by default comes up with lots of methods, but then we want to have more methods on top, right? And they provided all those methods for you, right? So one of them is batch, and that's what I have used it in the past, and that's what I thought, oh, it's a cool idea for you to try to implement the same, right? So you can see their batch implementation, and they do it using the array versus doing it using the list, but the concept is the same. Right. So if you're writing C# and you're like, hey, I want some more interesting Linq methods which are not necessarily available, feel free to look at more Linq. It has tons of methods that you can use.
Sorry, Judy, I just had one little bit separate question, right? So when we typically, at least in Python, right, we have this concept where you can basically take like, if you want to call it generator, right, and you can provide like an index with it. Is there something similar like that in C# where you can pass in, say, your IEnumerable and it'll return you back like kind of like a tuple of like, say, 0 and the 0th element and so forth?
Yes. Great point. So if I do numbers enumerable dot range and say 1 to 100, I can say new numbers equal to numbers dot So if you look at the select, it has two functions it can take, which has two integers as a parameter, if you see here.
Oh, I see,
Right.
index of the source element. Okay.
Next source element, and then actual element, and then whatever you want to resolve. Okay. So yes, you will be able to not just say, hey, enumerate over this, but you can also say, hey, give me the index because it's sort of important for implementing whatever logic I want to implement, right? So
Okay.
generators, Python, you can basically conceptually think as IEnumerables, basically.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of where I've
same.
been looking at it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So you'll be able to translate all those concepts over. And the more interesting part is that IEnumerable is all strongly typed, and it's going to be way more powerful in terms of what you can do with it, along with all the Linq functionality that you have. So I don't know in Python, in the generators, how much of this additional Linq-like constructs you can get, like that group by construct, right, and stuff like that. I don't know what all is available in Python world as it relates to generators.
So for us, most of it is actually through pandas, which is like a supplementary library where you kind of provide more of that concept on data frames, which is like, you kind of look at it as a table. So I mean,
Right.
I've kind of been visualizing all of this similar to it being kind of like a table, and you're just kind of writing a query on there using Linq, and it looks like,
Right.
to me at least, it looks very similar to like what I would write in Python, right, to do or accomplish kind of the same thing. So I think it is very, very similar in terms of syntax.
Okay. All right. So then what about the other exercise about doing the covers? Who tried that? Because that's a fun one. You tried that, Avi? Let's see what you got.
It required a little bit of thinking out the box because the answer that I was going with originally was not in line, but.
All right, let's see what you did. That's my original. All right, let's see. So this is something I want to share. We'll first look at what Avi did, and then I'll share you. So first of all, did everyone understand this problem? I think it's pretty straightforward, right? If you worked in finance, you have this long account, 100, 300, 200, you're short, and you're like, okay, if I want to cover this, right? I have 120 in short, so I need to take 100 from A and then take additional 20 from B, and for this 250, sort of just keep it trading over it, right? So let's see what Abby did. He got all the longs, current long, current amount, and you get the short. You got the current short amount. Okay.
Basically, the idea was to like go through the shorts using the regular enumeration and then manually iterate through the longs as needed. That was kind of the idea.
But why do you need to manually iterate over the longs?
So the reason is, right, because as you go through the shorts, you wanted some which would like be partially covered. So like say you're on the first short position, right? It uses say all of, I don't know, position A, right? And then it uses some of position B, but you still need to keep position B in mind, right? When you do the next short. So even though you go to the next short to cover, right, you have to keep in mind that you've used up some of position B already. And so that's why the
Right.
zero is there to say that, hey, like, actually there's nothing left for this position in the long, right? I need to go to the next long now to kind of cover it. Because originally I wrote it like just doing kind of a duplicate loop, right? Saying for each and for each, and my answer didn't line up with yours. So I was like, I guess we need to consider the usage of the shares at that point.
All right, so let's see. So 120, you take 100 from this, 20 from this, 250, you took all 250 from here, and then B has left 30. So what was our original thing, right? So you used up 250 plus 20 is 270 plus 30 from B, so that's 300, that's correct. A is 100, is correct. C is 140, so you're left with some balance in the C, right? So now let's try to make it so that longs cannot cover short at all. Then what do you return?
I expect it to be an error.
Right, let's try that. So let's simplify this, right? So 100, 300, 200, let's do all even numbers. Say 150, 250, and 200, right? So we are way more shorts than longs, right? We have 600 in longs, and we have, let's do 350 here. So 300, 400, 500, 700 in short, right? So what is it gonna do? Well, it is giving incorrect output, right? Because C does not have 300 longs, right? You already used up the 100 here, and then you're saying I'm gonna do 2 more hundreds here, right? So that is not gonna cover, which is fine. But it's an interesting problem, isn't it, in terms of trying to solve using Linq. In one way, you would think that it should be possible to solve it using Linq, right? Did anyone attempt this and have any solution? Shishir?
I completed 30% of it. So I completed. I was doing early return, so I returned in case the sum is not there at all. I returned in case there was exactly one match, and then I was in the middle of implementing the last part, which I haven't.
That's fine. What about you, Mark? Mark?
Hey, sorry, I actually didn't get to this assignment.
All right, that's fine. All right, so let me try to tell you guys as to how you can solve without using any of the mechanism that manual iteration and anything, right? So to get longs and get shorts is all fine, right? And what we really want to do is say, hey, when it's 120, I want to take 120 out of this account, right? So I have 100 and then I need to take 20, right? So what we can do to solve this problem is if we can somehow turn this longs into individual item of 1, then we can use Linq's take functionality to take the amount. Does that make sense? So let me turn this into very simple 10, 15, 20. And I'll make it minus 12, minus 25. Right? Let's say we have this simple scenario, right? What if we turn this guy into account A1, account A1, account A1 till 10 times? Sort of flatten it out, right? And same with the B. Now, once I have the quantity of 111, then I can say take, which is one of the methods. So how many elements you want to take based on this amount. And the problems becomes much more simpler, right? So let me first show you the output of get flat longs. Right? So what I did is I just said, instead of A having 10 and 1 enumerable, I said, give me A 10 times, give me B 10 times, or how many amount times, and C how many amount times. Right? And then what I can say is, I will iterate over the short, and I'll say, short, how many shorts you need? You will say 22. I'll say, take 22 from this enumerable. And that's my covering position. And then I can, once I get it, 22, I can group by the account again, so I know how much I took from each account. Right, so this is what we do, how to do the covers. We'll say, get me the flat longs, and for each short, right, I will absolutely have to do, I will have to do the absolute. And then from the longs, I say, take the amount of the short. And then I group by again by the account and sum it up. And then I return as a cover info. And then I skip how many ever I took in this step. Right? So let's say my short first amount was 5. So I'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'll take that much amount, group by it, and my next iteration of that flat longs will start from here, and I can just keep repeating it. Right? And then when you run it, so we can now do the get covers, .dump, and then I can see, okay, 12, I took 12, 10 and 2 from B, 25, I took this, and from C I took, now you see here, because there were not enough, it will say, hey, I can only take 8 from C. I can't take more than 8 because I have run out of my longs.
I think the key method was the skip, I guess, to get ahead in the iterator. I think that's kind of the, I guess, the key method in terms of doing that.
Did this make sense to everyone? How we solve this problem?
Yeah, JD, while this approach definitely looks cleaner and more elegant and the right usage of Linq, I guess, for this problem, do you really think this is the most efficient solution? If I have some really large positions, like stretching it out into like really long enumerables when I don't really, I don't know, it seems like overkill.
Great question.
It's short code, it's just more execution.
Yes, 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 absolutely. So now, let's say if I do like major amount, you will actually see it being considerably slower. because you are really stretching out this into a really long INM river, right? And it's still fairly fast, I guess. But you will have to go in millions or billions before things will start mattering, right? So, and I think Todd has heard me say this n number of times, right? First, write the code which is most readable, most obvious, where you can demonstratively prove that there are no edge cases there, right? Let it run. Now, if you come to the situation where it's like, oh, code is correct, but now I'm running into performance requirement where the code is not sufficient, at that time you carefully refactor, right? To presumptively think that, oh, this is not gonna be optimal is not really the way to go, right? You know, we have 3 gigahertz CPU speed, right? It can do gazillion operations for us in a second. And remember, IEnumerable is all sort of move next method, so it's not really occupying any memory. You're not really creating new memory, right? It's literally move next, move next, move next, and the code is running, right? So think about if your computer can do, say, 100 million operations per second, right? Why not let the computer do what it's supposed to be good at, and you get the code which is much more readable and clear in terms of the problem you're trying to solve, right? So at least that's my preference always, right? And then if you run into issue, then yeah, sure. I mean, you refactor, you figure out. So there will be like there you can actually do a stack-based solution, Avi, if you don't want to go this route, right? Where you pop a short, take the amount you want, and push the short with the remaining amount back on the stack to keep track of the state. So that would be a more cleaner solution if performance becomes a problem, right? But I do not look at performance, at least I don't try to write code with performance in the mind first. First priority is readability, and if it expresses the logic that I care about more correctly. So I know I just showed you this. I will not share this. I will encourage for you to write this flat long method and this thing. It will be very interesting in your head to be able to connect these dots and solve this problem of getting the covers for your shorts. Todd, any comments on this one? The long short one?
No.
So that WhatsApp chat that me and Duke were having that one night at 11 o'clock in the night, that is what I was telling him, that you should be able to write a Linq statement to solve the problem you're trying to solve. So just a fun tidbit, I wrote that code, I suggested to write this code on WhatsApp, which was pretty fun. And the idea I'm not trying to get across is, hey, look at me, I'm cool. I'm trying, like, I think in Linq, right? Once you really understand Linq, you can think in Linq that, hey, it's just IEnumerable. Can I express my idea in terms of an IEnumerable on top? And it enables a lot of powerful problem solving ability for you, right? So with that, any other questions on the Linq series so far? We can go over them, anything that I might have tripped you, puzzled you, or you've been wondering about.
Just a couple of random things that the more Linq package that you pulled up, it's actually pretty awesome. And it's funny you asked Avi about Python. Pretty much everything in Pandas data frame does offer those functions that you pulled up on the list. And it's good to kind of see that it's available in Linq too. And I used it a ton of times without ever checking who built it, how they built it, because it did the job. But it's definitely a good package. The one other thing that I was wrong about for a very long time, JD, I think you may have corrected me on this. I used to think Linq or Lambda were either or, like two alternatives for the longest, not knowing that it's just Linq being expressed, one in a query form and the other one in a method form. And the the method will basically have Lambda as a part of it, but it's Linq either way. For me, for the longest, I used to think that Linq is Linq. The query part of it is Linq.
Right.
Right. So that kind of, yeah, it took me a while to kind of wrap my head around it. I remember asking you this, I don't know, years ago. Yeah. We've gone over that, but this was good.
Yeah, it is very interesting, right? I would also encourage, if you haven't already, to look at the Linq to SQL example. So if you get LinkPad, right, you can actually plug in that demo database and write some select statement, and you will be able to see how same query syntax can also translate into SQL. That is very illuminating in terms of how the whole framework is set up, right? And they call it Linq is language integrated query, and the idea is we all do slicing and dicing like 90% of the time. How can we make it more expressive for the users without worrying about the mechanics, right? When Sushi wrote that, hey, I want to get the numbers 10, and he wrote 4 each, 1 to 10, get me the list, right? What I constantly look for in the code is, how can I hide the mechanics, right? And have a one-liner which tells me what it's doing without actually having to see all the mechanics. And that's the goal of Linq, and that's the goal you should strive for, is the code at a higher and higher level, right?
So, one last thing. So I obviously didn't have, I wanted to go over the exercises, but I caught up on the video from last week, like less than 2 hours ago. But I wanted to catch up before this call, which was good. I think you guys briefly talked about Linq to SQL, and there was an example. I think Todd asked this question. You mentioned that, well, you have Dapper, you technically use it, but you do have Linq to SQL. Most people end up still using Dapper, or why was it like Linq to SQL seems almost redundant given the number of, I guess, given the audience that actually uses it? Do you find that helpful? Like, do you use it? Did it substitute anything for you? Or did you use it from scratch for any applications where you found it more helpful than using something lightweight like a Dapper?
So the thing is, what ended up happening with Linq to SQL versus Dapper? So you have to think about the problem in 2 ways, right? Have you heard of a thing called impedance mismatch between programming languages and databases?
Absolutely not.
Okay. So there is a term called impedance mismatch between the world, in the sense the databases uses the relational model and everything is a tuple, right? But our programming world is object oriented, right? That you have objects, they might have some more objects and stuff like that, right? So how do you bridge that gap, right? So one way people try to do is, hey, we come up with object databases where I can just store the whole object as it is, right? So MongoDBs, NoSQLs of the world, they are like, you know what, your objects, just store the objects, right? But what's the problem there? The problem there becomes is, once you like your object model in the programming world, fine, but once the data is stored, you want some other ways to access the data, manipulate the data, see the data, create reports. At that time, that object model sort of breaks down, because there is no tooling on that side to let you create any report that you want.
Right.
So relational databases are good from that sense, right? And as you know, your data will always live. It will far outlive your application code, right? Once someone develops an application and they start storing that, we have this table called market price, right? Guys on my team will know, right? That just meaningful data, like I just cannot throw it out. We are trying to redo some of the other pieces to make the system better, but throwing out the data model is just very, very difficult, right? So now what happens is, C# guy's vision was, hey, you want to query the data, and you want to write some SQL query, right? Now what you find is the kind of query you would want to write, right, very quickly turns into something that you can't express in Linq properly. Or Linq will generate a query which is not optimal, right? Because one thing you have to remember, once you use Linq to SQL, you can tell it what kind of SQL to write.
Right.
Right? You write the Linq query, right? And I would say 6 out of 10 for simple queries, Linq will do the right thing for you. That what you write will translate into a very reasonable SQL that server can run efficiently and get you the data back and everything works. But what about those 4 out of 10 cases where Linq to SQL can't express the query you want to, right? So now you have to do half here, half there, right? So the reason I don't personally use Linq to SQL is if I have to solve this impedance mismatch between a relational system and my programming world, I want just one solution.
Fair enough.
Right? That, you know what, I understand SQL, I know how to write SQL, and the only problem left is when I get this SQL tuples, how do I map those tuples into C# objects? Right? So Dapper came out with great API and a very fast solution to turn the tuples into C# objects.
Right.
Right? So when you heard this term called ORMs, like Linq to SQL is sort of an ORM, object relational mapping, right? It's a extremely well-studied topic, and it's just an extremely hard problem to give you a unified model that you just worry about programming language and you don't have to worry about relational model, right? No, at least from what I know so far, no one has been able to really find a 100% solution to that problem, right? So at least for myself, I just prefer like, hey, you know what? I will just write queries or store procedure, and then the boring part of, if you remember back in the day, ADO.NET, you call it, and then you write your own code saying data row.this,
Yep.
assign it to your object, right? So that the boring part goes away, then, hey, life is simple. I write my
Right.
SQL, I get feature objects, and I just move on with my life.
Right. Got it.
Did that answer the question?
It did. It did. Yeah. No, it's helpful.
So it was a great idea in theory, right? But the implementation is just so difficult that I don't know how to really get everyone to use it.
Yeah, I mean, I think for straightforward vanilla cases, it served as a good tool. But like you said, people end up putting a lot of logic in their SQL. The more complex, regular use cases people run into, it kind of failed. It just didn't, and not because of its fault. It's just because the 4 out of 10 times that you mentioned, it's still based on your Linq. If you can produce that properly, you can expect it to produce the right SQL to back it up. So.
Right. Also, you know, when you write store procedure, right, and I don't remember off the top of my head, Linq to SQL will also let you call store procedure, but
Yeah.
it won't let you serialize on a C# type, C# side in a custom type. It will always give you an anonymous type that matches it. So it makes it difficult to pass things around. Right. So I think they had good idea in theory, but they did not have people on their team who have worked in, say, line of business application long enough to look at those use cases more and see, hey, how can we define an API which is slightly better? So Dapper didn't try to solve everything. It just says database to C# is a one line of query.
Yep.
And that's a very narrow problem that you can actually solve extremely well.
Yep.
Right. Okay, so it's almost 1 o'clock. I wanna just quickly talk about what we're gonna go from next week, and I want everyone to think about this. Here's the problem. I want everyone to think about. Let's say you're given a problem to design this system. That is, a broker puts out a financing file on an FTP every day, right? So let's say you're shorting some stocks and it puts out a financing file saying that, hey, this is what you accrued so far for the shorts that you hold on the book. Okay, and your system's job is to get that CSV file, load it up, store it in the database, and show the user that, hey, this is my year-to-date financing accrual. Right?
Can you elaborate on accrual? What do you mean?
Say it again.
Can you elaborate on accrual? What do you mean exactly?
Talking about the accrued interest on the position that you're taking financing.
Accrued interest. Okay. Like not accrued stock.
So let's say you short, Sisha, I was telling you the other day, right? Like when you short, you have to borrow the stock. So let's say you shorted 1 million Apple, 1 million Google, you'll borrow it. And now every day you are paying a financing on that borrow, right? So broker will publish out a statement saying for 9-10 September, you are paying $100 in financing. For 11 September, you are paying $120 in financing, so on and so forth. Right? They're publishing that every day. Your job is to take that CSV file and show me year to date how much you have paid in financing. That's the problem we're going to talk about, and we're going to talk in terms of what it takes to design a system that is resilient given this problem. So what I want everyone to do is think about all the failure cases that you run into or potentially can think of, and how would you handle those failure cases, like edge cases. And we will try to look at those failure cases and how it relates to exception handling as it relates to system design. Make sense? Yeah. So yeah. So that's the goal. Next week is going to be really important in terms of actual very actionable thing that you can use in your day-to-day life as it relates to system design.
When you're shorting, is there a defined date that you have to give the stocks back, or is it more of whenever I want to give back? Like I'm just trying to understand when you say accrual, like is it more of whenever I'm ready to give the stocks back?
Don't worry about the actual shorting mechanism and all that. Assume that there is a file. I mean, assume that file will come and we don't have to worry about the covering of the shorts. Don't worry about that. Okay? And collect those notes. We'll talk about what's a thing that we need to worry about in terms of the code, what we don't have to worry about.
Are we doing 11 next week?
Yes, I will send out an email. So she suggested that we shift this up a little bit earlier so that Sunday is available. So I'll send out another poll, and I think most likely from next Sunday we'll shift it to 11. So 11 to 12, and then so that Sisha can set up his fantasy football lineup one time. That was his main reason, I know that. All right?
Sounds good.
All right, great. Thanks, everyone.
See you.
Let's see you next time.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Hey, thank you. Take care, everyone.